A few things to just cover before we dive into the agenda for this evening's meeting. So formally, the legal standing of the meeting is that it's being held under the Local Authorities Coronavirus Flexibility of Local Authority Meetings Regulations 2020, in response to which Bristol City Council has produced a virtual meetings procedure rules that are available on the website that lay out how we are conducting meetings virtually. And they mean that decisions made by this committee have the same standing and validity as if they were being made in person at City Hall. So members of the public who've submitted public forum statements, your statements have been circulated to the members of the committee before the meeting, and they'll be taken into account. Those of you who have indicated that you wish to speak will be called at the appropriate point. People who are watching the webcast, you'll see that there are a number of different people on the screen during the meeting, but only myself and the other councillors will be the ones making the decision on the application. A few bits of housekeeping to members of the committee. Please make sure you remember to mute yourself when you're not speaking, especially after you've spoken, remute yourself. If you wish to speak, please remember to use the raise hand facility in Zoom. It makes it much easier to track who wants to speak rather than just doing that and trying to wave. Yeah, if you need to leave the meeting for technical reasons or whatever, try and warn us beforehand. When we get to the vote, we'll be doing a name vote like we've done for the previous meetings. So we'll go through each person in turn to ensure that we know exactly how each person is voting. And I think that covers it. So the second item on the agenda is the apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
Chair, so we have Councillor Carla Denyer has sent her apologies, and Councillor Clive Stevens is her substitution.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? Clive?
Thank you, Tom. I actually have two, both with the same application, the Lower Ashley Road one. Firstly, in 2015, before I was a councillor, I was chair of the Tree Forum, and I wrote in objecting to the loss of the 5 maple trees. Permission was given, as we know. It was a long time ago. I've read the officer's report then, and I'm happy that I am not predetermined. Now, the second thing relates to this application again. In 2019, in June 2019, I wrote in requesting a revised tree report. In July 2019, a revised tree statement was posted. That closed my inquiry, and I'm equally not predetermined. Thank you.
Thank you, Clive. I see Mike has his hand up as well. Mike.
Yeah, I'll be withdrawing from the first item to item A, Lower Ashley Road, to make a statement. So I'll have my camera switched off for most of that item.
Yep, thank you. Any other declarations? No. Okay, so the next item is the minutes of the previous meeting. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes? No one seems to be indicating. Therefore, can I have a seconder for the for signing the minutes as an accurate record, please? See, Richard's got his hand up. So he got there first. I'll take you, Richard. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is appeals. I'll hand over to you, Gary.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very brief update this time around because in the current situation, appeal decisions from the planning inspectorate have dried up somewhat. So you can see, I think there's only 6 or 7 decisions since the last time we met. Just one of interest, which is number 63, which relates to a telecoms application at Whitehall Road. And you can see there that it was, I think, an update of existing apparatus, so a replacement monopole. And you can see also that permission had been refused under delegated powers, and also the appeal was dismissed, so permission refused by the planning inspectorate. Now, for telecoms applications, I must say that's quite unusual. So it was an interesting decision, and the inspector's rationale was that she felt that the increased height and monopole would have an impact on the visual amenities of the area, but crucially that the proposed operators had not submitted sufficient information that they had explored, different options to site the equipment in the local area. So in the absence of that, the inspector found harm to the visual amenity of the area and dismissed the appeal. So again, we'll await whether there's a resubmission of that with that further information, or hopefully a rethink as to where that equipment may go. So that's my appeals update this time, Chair.
Thank you, Gary. Does anyone have any questions on that or any of the other appeals? No. Okay, let's move on to the enforcements then. Back to you, Gary.
Thank you, Chair. And I think what you'll notice now with the committees being every 4 weeks now rather than every 6, that the number of enforcement notices we're reporting as new will decrease. But I'm glad to say at least there are 2 served since the last time we met, and they're listed for you there on North Road in Bishopston and Phelan Crescent as well. So just the 2 this time around. So but happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Gary. Any questions on enforcements, please? No. Ollie, can you move your phone a bit down? We can only see your eyes upwards. Thanks. I didn't know whether you were trying to kind of make eyebrows that you wanted to speak or something. Right, so that's enforcement's done. The next item on the agenda is public forum. So for the benefit of people watching, at development control committees, we take the public forum before each application rather than right at the beginning of the meeting. People who are speaking, you'll have a minute to speak. You don't need to repeat your statement. We've had your statement already, so summarize the pertinent points, make any additional points you wish to make. The way it works with the virtual meeting is that you'll be added to the meeting. You'll be asked to state your name for the record, and then I'll give you the go-ahead to start your minute. I think what we noticed last time is that there might be a bit of a lag between the YouTube feed and real life. So I'd recommend turning YouTube off if you've got that on. Otherwise, it can be a bit confusing. So without further ado, therefore, let's move to the first substantive item for this evening, which is 31 to 45 Lower Ashley Road. So first of all, we'll do the public forum for that. And the first person we have is John Tarleton.
He's in the room, Chair.
Hi, John. Looks like you're on mute. Can you just take yourself off mute and state your name, please?
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, my name's Professor John Tarleton, and I want to ask a question on the planning office's attitude to the pollution levels in the area.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so Lower Ashley Road already exceeds legal limits for nitrogen dioxide by between something like about 30 and 60%, depending on which year you're looking at. As such, it's a designated air quality management area. A report commissioned by the developers themselves showed that air quality will in fact deteriorate as a result of this development, and in some properties by over 14%. This would be with inevitable deterioration in the health of the community, which already suffers extremely high levels of respiratory disorders. Indeed, the council's own air quality consultant objects to this development on that basis, thus approving this development despite knowing that the air quality will further deteriorate beyond legal limits and in contravention of planning policy DM33 and BCS 23, amongst 10 other planning policies that I think this application contravenes. Will the council then take any...
Can you sum up, please?
...for increases in respiratory pathologies? Thank you.
Thank you, John. The next person we have is Ornella Sabine.
Apologies, just getting her in the room.
Yeah, no worries. I appreciate there's clicking involved.
She needs to put on a video. Where is she? I don't think she's properly in frame, Chair. I think.
Hi, Ornella. Can you move your frame a bit so we can see you a bit? Thank you. And can you, if you want to come off mute and just state your name so we'll show that everything's working.
Ornella Sabin.
Hi, sorry, I pronounced
Hi.
your last name wrong, didn't I?
I don't
apologies for
mind.
that.
It's okay.
Go ahead, you've got a minute.
Oh, hi, sorry, took me ages to get in. Basically, we're living in a very polluted area. There's been a lot of construction work, as well as the traffic, of course, with COVID has gone down quite a lot. But, we're all getting breathing problems. We're all, the children in the local youth centre, half of them have got asthma. There's all this talk about Bristol, I've got friends who've had lung cancer and stuff like that. The pollution levels are very high in this area. We need all the trees that we can get. It's not, I'm not one to have lung problems, but I started having them as well. And this is, this comes from Lombardy as well, where Lombardy has had high COVID cases because everybody's lungs are in a bad state because that area is really polluted. Now, we're only asking the council and the developers to save 3 trees. It's not very much to ask. It's very little to ask, and it would make a big, big difference to this area. When you think about it, you need
sum up, please.
Okay. Well, you need 2 mature trees for 4 feet for a family of 4. That gives you oxygen for a year. We're already under those trees. You cannot replace mature trees. You just cannot have the amount of oxygen out of a new tree from an
We're going to
old
have to
tree.
stop you, Ornella. You've gone well over the
Thank you.
time there. Thank you. Next is Anita, who I see is already in the room with us. Hi, Anita. Can you just state your name for the record, please?
Yes, my name's Anita Bennett, Ashley Ward.
Hi, go ahead.
Many of us in the area believe that this is a very act of discrimination. We have no neighborhood plan, we have no conservation group, we have no planning group. When John Garlick was cutting down the trees, he said, F the council. Now I will put up the student flats. But that student planning permission was legally flawed. And the same officers who now want you to agree this are basing this on flawed decisions in the past. Secondly, there is a total lack of an environmental report. So if there's no danger, why hide the report? Or would it risk scuppering plans for the most unpopular development we've seen in the inner city area? Has everybody stood in those on Lower Ashley Road during rush hour? You would notice then that it is incredibly noisy. It's one of Bristol's noisiest roads, and approving this planning application would make an even more unbearable racket with loud exhausts.
Can you sum up, please?
So, question, what plan does our council have to mitigate and protect all the other surrounding residents from the blasting racket to come? There's a large social housing there. And secondly, if financially nothing is done, what are the plans to compensate local residents who will develop mental health, sleep, and other health complications as a direct result of illegal levels of noise?
I have to stop you there. You've gone over the time. Thank you. The next we have the Bristol Tree Forum.
We've got Vasily. I'm not sure if I've pronounced his name right. He's there.
Hi, Vasily.
Yes, that's correct. My name is Vasily Papastavrou, and I'm the secretary of the Bristol Tree Forum.
Hi, please go ahead.
Bristol's planning policy, BCS9 from 2011 states individual green assets should be retained where possible and integrated into new development.
These trees, which have TPOs, are on the edge of the development site. Alternative designs have been provided to the developer which keep the trees, and so the officer's report on page 13 is incorrect in stating that the removal of trees is essential for development. It is possible to build next to existing trees. Take a look at the Clifton Suspension Bridge Visitor Centre, which is within 1 or 2 meters of a tree, and where there is even a cutout to the roof line to accommodate one branch of an important street tree. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Susan Hackett.
There she is.
Hi, Susan. Can you just say your name for the record, please, before we start?
Suzanne Sadie Hackett.
Hi, please go ahead.
Okay, first of all, I want to draw your awareness to the climate and ecological emergency that we and the whole world are in, which has become more acutely apparent since 2016. The planning application has been characterised by multiple inaccuracies, discrepancies, omissions, procedural aberrations, and even deceptions. Some of these have been carried over from a previous extant application on this site. The planning officer appears to be attempting to apply precedent law in that he suggests any discrepancy included in a previous consented application cannot be challenged as part of the current application. So my question to you is this: there have been a number of previous planning decisions on this site, and will this planning application be considered on its own merit and not by simply reinforcing previous decisions which may be flawed? You have given me an answer of sorts to that, but
Can you sum up, please?
Well, that's still my question to you. What are these other considerations? And please be aware of the current climate crisis that we face and how important these trees are, the 3 remaining trees.
Okay, thank you. And the next person hopefully joining is Amira Cole.
Her audio, I think, is hesitating.
Yes.
Amir, oh, she's not going to hear me. I was going to ask her to select join with audio connected. Yeah.
Looks like it's on now.
Hi.
Hi, Amira. Can you just say your name for the record, please?
Okay, Amira Cole.
Hi. Please go ahead. You've got a minute.
Okay. I object to the application as it stands because the proposal structure harms the street scenes, subtracts from the character and identity of the local area. It does not take into consideration the full requirements of the Bristol Climate Change and Sustainable Framework for Planning application. It discriminates against some of the most vulnerable people in our community. So in addition to my statement, I would like to say that under Article 3 of the Constitution, as a citizen of Bristol, I have been denied the right to information and participation, in that I have been denied the opportunity to read and comment on the contamination report, which should have been included in this documentation pack. Attempts to rectify this has been denied with no explanation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And then next we have Sam Dewar.
Connected. It needs to unmute. Can you unmute yourself, please, Sam? Lovely.
Yeah, sorry, is that working now?
Yes, it is. Can you just state your name for the record, please?
Yeah, my name is Sam Dewar. I'm acting on behalf of the applicant.
I'm doing really badly with people's names tonight, aren't I? Sorry. Go ahead. You've got a minute.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, members and officers. My client is an established developer of affordable homes, and this site is immediately deliverable and will provide an invaluable contribution to the shortage of affordable housing in Bristol. We are aware of the objections regarding trees. However, as accepted by the case officer, permission has already been granted for their removal. We're aware of the recent holding objection from the Environment Agency. However, this is the first time they've objected, and I do believe this is a misunderstanding on a point that we can easily clarify. Whilst our development is proposed as predominantly car-free, it's located in a highly sustainable location in close proximity to a range of public transport, shops and services. We've overcome all concerns raised by officers and agree with the recommendation that any minor outstanding issues can be dealt with by condition or on a defer to delegate to the head of DM. The proposed development offers substantial public benefit by regenerating a vacant brownfield site and with much needed affordable housing. Thank you, members and officers. Good evening.
Thank you. Next we have Councillor Mike Davies.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mike.
In Ashley Ward, there are high levels of poverty and deprivation, but at the same time, property prices are some of the highest in the city. Many people are having to move out of the communities that have been their home because of ever-increasing housing costs and a shortage of new housing. I've kept a close eye on planning in the ward over the last 4 years. Whilst there's been a high quantity of development, most of it has been either office to residential permitted development or student accommodation, neither of which provides affordable housing. This is the first time in many years that a scheme like this has come forward, with the developer's intention for this to be an entirely social rented scheme. This is a particularly unusual situation, seeing as the site already has a live permission for student housing, and I can only presume that that is what will be built if the current application is not approved. In either case, the trees are to be removed, but of course,
Sum up, Mike, please.
They will be replaced with a greater number of trees, and the process of delivering those trees in the local area has already started. Thank you.
Thank you. And then the final public forum we have is from Howard Ogden.
Hello, hi, I'm Howard Ogden.
Hi, please go ahead.
Hi, so here I am at the trees. I've just been listening to Sam say that there's substantial public benefit to this application, and I disagree. The developer said that there are 16 units potential here if we keep these beautiful trees. So I don't understand why a site's not viable if it loses 12 units, but can have the trees. Obviously we're south facing here. I've just taken the temperature in the shade, 32 degrees. Out of the shade, 38.5. The heat island effect is live here. And we've lost these two. We've already lost these two trees. They're gone. So it's heating up here. The impact that that has is on health, is on energy, because people need to use air conditioning more. So here we have the south-facing facade of what would be this block, this concrete block, which I believe contravenes BCS 21 for quality.
Can you sum up, please?
The sun will be on the front of that building all day, and the windows don't open. The air conditioning will fail in its lifetime, and people will be very uncomfortable. And look at how beautiful this road is.
Thank you. So that concludes the public forum for this item. So let's therefore move to the officer report, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say something before Charlotte talks through the planning issues on this application. And really, I mean, as you'll all be aware, really, that this has been a contentious planning application. And I have to say, this is one of those situations that, as a committee, you find yourself in on occasions where often the issue that stakeholders care about most, in this case, I would say the trees. Obviously, there are other issues as well, but the tree seems to be top of the list in terms of areas of concern. So it's, you know, it's one of those cases where that kind of issue, unfortunately, the committee, in its role as local planning authority, either has no or very limited discretion over at this point in time. This is due to the planning history that's set out in the report, which members should give weight to. The trees in question were TPO'd in 2005, But since then, on 2 separate occasions, a committee in 2007 and also in 2016, the council as local planning authority has granted planning permission for developments that result in the loss of the trees. On the first occasion, no compensation payment for replacement trees was secured. And the reason for this was that the policies were different and the Bristol tree replacement standard was not in operation. However, on the second time in 2016, the core strategy had been adopted, and also the Bristol tree replacement standard was in effect, and therefore a payment was secured to compensate for the loss of trees at the time when planning permission was granted. Since then, reserved matters approval have been granted for that development. This is the student development, and therefore the payment for the tree replacement has been made. And as Councillor Davis referred to in his public forum statement, around half of that has already been committed for new tree planting in the area by the local area committee. So the permission, the student permission in question is extant, and it can be implemented up until May 2021. Outside of the planning issues, there have been concerns, as you will be aware, about land ownership, particularly with regards to where the trees themselves are sited. This hasn't been helped by contradictory information on the BCC website, but following further examination of various documents, your officers are confident that the trees are on land under private ownership. But as you all know, land ownership issues aren't material to decisions you make on planning applications. So the trees themselves, whilst they are an area of concern for a lot of people, our advice is they cannot be protected at this stage due to that history and those issues. Planning permission already exists for their removal, and this should be given weight by the committee. The application raises a number of other issues which are covered in the report. Overall, officers consider that planning permission can be granted for the development. The development includes policy compliant affordable housing and potentially more. If planning permission isn't granted for this development, there is the real prospect of the extant permission for the student accommodation being implemented. This would still result in the loss of the trees, still result in similar impacts in terms of the other issues covered in the report, but would not deliver any affordable housing. So thank you for that, Chair. I will now hand over to Charlotte to cover the main issues on the planning application.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. I'm just going to share my presentation with you to begin with. Let's check the right one. Okay, hopefully you can now see the slideshow.
Yep, it's up.
Okay. I'd just like to start by referring to the questions raised in the public forum. Those members of the public forum have received detailed responses to those questions, which are included within the public forum statements. So hopefully members have had a chance to have a read through those responses. I'd also like to highlight at this stage the amendment sheet, which covers a number of issues. So firstly, additional representations were received since the officer report was completed. And then actually, even since the amendment sheet was completed, we've received a large number of further comments, which takes it to a total of 375 objections to this scheme. I would note that the majority of the later objections, the sort of large volume of objections, were received on the grounds of the loss of the trees. And if members consider it to be relevant, many of these were received from outside the local area and based on standard letter wording. Also to draw your attention, updated representations were received from the Bristol Tree Forum, Montpellier Conservation Group and Bristol Clean Air Alliance. Also on the amendment sheet is reference to children's play space provision and a set of recommended planning conditions and advice notes. Moving on to, I'm just going to do a sort of run through an introduction to the scheme and application site. So I'm sure many of you are aware of where the application site is now in St Paul's and Ashley Ward, close to the M32 junction. It is a mixed area with commercial uses along the main roads and residential uses beyond. Referenced in the application are, hopefully you can see the cursor here on the presentation here, Ashley Street Park, Minor Road Park, and St Agnes Park, which are referenced in that section relating to children's play space, and the application site shown in red. The aerial view of the site you can now see shows the site with the 5 original maple trees. As Gary's mentioned, subject to a tree preservation order, 3 are now remaining, and that this image also shows trees adjacent to the site, which have now been removed. They're on the adjacent application site. The site's on Lower Ashley Road, but borders Conduit Road to the east and Gordon Road to the north. And you may have seen reference in the application to a footpath that runs where, if you can see the cursor now, between Lower Ashley Road and Gordon Road. As you can see from this particular aerial view, the nature of existing buildings in the area is quite varied in terms of form, between traditional Victorian terraces, post-war flatted development, and even modern new build housing. And the scale of development generally ranges between 2 and 4 stories. There have been a number of permitted developments in the area that you will have heard reference to. So just off the bottom of the picture, the sort of green area here, the Tudor Road development site, adjacent to the site, a site known as the Yard Arts site, and off the north of the picture would be the Brooks Dyeworks site, a large major residential scheme. So relevance is the immediately adjacent Yard Arts site. This is the elevations for that approved development. And on this image, you can see the extant student permission scheme just to the right of the picture here, outlined in a sort of blue dashed line. So that was for a 4-story development of 31 residential flats, 13 car parking spaces, and 20% affordable rental, affordable housing tenure. The above image, just as a quick reference to the existing site survey. Again, this shows the 5 original maple trees rather than the 3 remaining and those on the adjacent site. Essentially, the site comprised a single-story office building, which had been vacant for a significant period, that has undergone partial demolition. I'm just going to run through a few site photographs now, which if you have any questions, we could refer back to during the discussion. So this shows the nature of the Lower Ashley Road frontage with a partial tree removal at that time. And worth noting is to the left of the image and the footpath to Gordon Road. A number of images in here. At photo 1, the site has recently been used as a hand car wash business with temporary access from Lower Ashley Road, and this just shows the general nature of Lower Ashley Road. These images above now show the relationship with properties mainly on fronting photo 2, fronting Lower Ashley Road, and photos 3 and 4, the properties on Conduit Road. Also worth noting that these photos actually show the 5 original trees. It's obviously taken in winter, so there's no leaf cover, and it's prior to those tree removals. And then these photos are from the Gordon Road aspect. So the site in photo 1 is the gated area. Photo 4 shows the nature of that footpath leading back to Lower Ashley Road, and also worth noting is the character of properties along Lower Ashley Road there, and the relationship with the property known as 3 Gordon Road, which you can just see in image 2. So moving on to the planning history, you've heard from Gary the relevance of the extant planning permission as a material consideration. This image shows the landscape plan for that permission, which was some office accommodation at ground floor with student accommodation above. It did have a slightly different site extent. This plot of land wasn't included within that permission. It didn't include any car parking, and obviously it included tree removals. The above image is something that I've put together to try and compare the existing current proposed scheme, which is the grey, green and blue scheme, with the red line is the extant permission. So it's based on scale measurements, but I would note it hasn't been verified by the applicants themselves. The red line is the 3-storey element of that extant permission, with the solid areas being the single-storey elements of that permission. And just moving on quickly to a comparison of the extant scheme at the top and the currently proposed scheme below, which shows the sort of very different design approach taken. But the main thing to notice is that the extant scheme was basically a 3-storey scheme with a 4th storey of accommodation within the roof space, whereas the current scheme is a 4-storey scheme with a full 4th storey of accommodation. And moving on to the proposed scheme itself, the proposed landscape plan shows here that there's two car parking spaces which are accessed from Gordon Road. The worth noting is that the area of, sorry, I'm just trying to find an area of the application site would be dedicated towards widening the footpath to Gordon Road. That's a key strategic cycle link. And actually the adjacent site, that known as the Yard Art site, has also taken the same approach to provide a small strip of land towards the widening of that space. The 2 car parking spaces includes disabled car parking provision. Refuse and plant store are in this location. So refuse collection would take place from Gordon Road. Tree planting is proposed on Conduit Road. And there's an area of amenity space at the rear of the building, which I believe also provides fire escape access from the main lift core. At this stage, I'd refer you to page 4 of the amendment sheet and the update on children's play space considerations, which essentially officers have raised no objections on those grounds. And I'd also refer you to page 5 of the amendment sheet, where recommended condition 2 seeks to explore variations to the scheme to accommodate replanting of small tree species to Lower Ashley Road, but also improving access from the ground floor units through to the rear amenity space and beyond by removing this enclosed corridor and providing windows and doors to the units to improve the access to that space. So moving on to the first floor plan, this is just really to demonstrate that the building line oversails that car parking area adjacent to Gordon Road. The layout of the units is based around this access corridor at the rear. Sorry, I'm just trying to indicate with the cursor there. So it does result in a scheme that has a number of dual aspect units, and some of them are single aspect units. That layout is repeated at 2nd floor level, and at 3rd floor, you can see the setback nature of the top floor of accommodation. There will be conditions recommended that the flat roofed areas couldn't be used as amenity space or balconies for amenity reasons in relation to neighbouring properties. Moving on to the elevations, these are 3D images of the proposed scheme. In this particular image, the grey block that you can see on the left-hand side of the image is showing the approved development at the Yard Art site adjacent, the rough scale of that. And the proposed elevations, the detailed elevations, are within your supporting documents. So overall, the scale and footprint of this scheme is considered by officers to be appropriate within the context and to make efficient use of land in this sustainable location. We note the public objections received on design grounds. Our city design group have not objected to the proposal, and elevations have been redesigned to have more of a vertical emphasis and provide a contemporary reflection of the existing properties opposite on Lower Ashley Road. And overall, the proposal will be considered to have an enhanced landscaping provision and public realm impact than the approved extant scheme. This is another 3D image showing the proposal from the east direction coming from the M32, and you can see the relationship with it's just shown as a block there, but the flats on Conduit Road. I've also included the following image, which I think it's taken from the submitted daylight sunlight study, but I think it's quite helpful in sort of showing how the block relates to approved developments at Tudor Road here, shown in blue, and the Yard Art site 17 to 29 Lower Ashley Road, but also how it relates to these properties on Gordon Road and Conduit Road. These are just a quick comparison of essentially the rear elevations of the extant scheme and the proposed scheme. So the key point to note is that while there is an increased bulk and massing from that top floor change with the proposed scheme, the proposal has essentially removed windows within the rear elevation. So the impact in terms of privacy for neighbouring residents would be improved in that sense. I'm not intending to go through all of the key issues in detail. As you've seen from the report, officers consider the key issues to be flood risk and air quality matters. So I'd just like to talk quickly about air quality, and we've got Steve Crawshaw, who's from our air quality team, who I'm sure many of you have heard from before, who can answer any technical questions. But some of the key considerations are highlighted in this slide. Essentially, air quality for the future residents of the site is deemed to be acceptable. There's not a requirement for sealed shut windows on the basis of air quality for those residents, but we would be recommending mechanical ventilation to units fronting Lower Ashley Road on noise grounds, and that would allow residents to have the windows shut if they needed, or to open them, perhaps at times of lower traffic, etc., when it's quieter, should they wish. The air quality assessment highlighted that a larger number of properties would be adversely affected than would experience a beneficial impact in terms of air quality. So those are existing properties along Lower Ashley Road. The applicant considers that this is only a small number of properties overall, and that because of this, the guidance referenced in that slide, that would not be a significant impact. Our air quality team has advised that while that is a relatively small number of properties, the report is clear that more properties would be adversely impacted than experience a beneficial impact. And they continue to object as the scale of impact ranges from slight adverse to substantial adverse. As you'll see from the report, and it's at page 28, officers have weighed this in the balance, and particularly we've given weight to the extant planning permission of 3 stories, that would also be likely to have an adverse impact on air quality, and really that even a scheme lower than 3 stories would have some adverse impact on air quality, such that that is a material consideration, and we would not object on air quality grounds, but obviously that's a key consideration for members to weigh up in your decision. And in terms of flood risk, you'll note that there has been an Environment Agency objection that was received quite late because of updates to some of the flood data and flood maps. However, we consider that could be dealt with should members be minded to grant approval of this scheme, post decision through further discussions with the Environment Agency and the applicant to see if that can be addressed. So we would be recommending approval subject to that objection being overcome. And so our officer recommendation for approval is also subject to planning agreement and conditions listed on the amendment sheet. So just to sum up, the key issue before members is therefore whether you consider the current proposal to be policy compliant, weighing all considerations in the balance, including the extant permission, to which it would obviously be your determination how much weight to give to that. And we as officers have given considerable weight to all of the matters, including air quality. And therefore we'd recommend grant of consent subject to all the conditions listed at page 4 of the amendment sheet and subject to section 106 requirements to cover those matters listed in the slide above. So just to conclude, I'd now be happy to answer any questions that members may have on these matters or any of the detailed key issues listed within the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that extensive presentation. So I've got Joe with a hand up already for a question. Go ahead, Joe.
Yes, I just wanted to make a brief comment to the planning officer. And I've heard this before, but I think we need to be very careful about dismissing objections because the objectors use the template. You know, not everybody is that confident about their ability to write a coherent, communication. And, you know, as an inclusive city where quite a lot of people's first language is not English, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people put in objections in that way. So I just think it's quite important not to dismiss them out of hand. Anyway, just a couple of questions. It sort of seems that a lot of the reason for us approving this application seems to be based on this extant student accommodation. And I've just wondered why that accommodation hasn't been built. If it's already been given permission, and bearing in mind it apparently valid until next May, that sounds to me as though if it was a 3-year, that they've had that permission for quite a while. I lost track. There's been so many different applications. I was looking at the history and I couldn't work out what was where. But I don't understand why has no building taken place, and you know, if there's problems with building student housing, how do we know anything is going to be built between now and 2021? In which case that planning permission will lapse anyway. And then the other question, I suppose, is really what is the point of having tree preservation orders if we're not actually going to adhere to them? This is a little bit concerning that it just seems, and we seem to be talking about planning permission that was given quite a long time ago when times were different. So those are just issues that I think I would like some more, you know, a little bit more information on, please.
Just in relation to your first point, that's noted regarding the standard lettered template. It wasn't a case of necessarily dismissing it, but just perhaps providing context for the very large volume of objections we've received in the last couple of days. In terms of the extant planning permission, I can't comment specifically on why that hasn't been built. I guess that's outside of the planning process, but there's no sort of significant planning reasons with regards to discharging planning conditions or matters like that we're aware of that have prevented that. In terms of the extant planning permission, because some demolition works have commenced on the site, it could be considered that that has been actually implemented, and therefore no time constraint remains with the future implementation of that. And in terms of tree preservation orders, obviously that matter was considered under that extant planning permission, that although the trees were subject to tree preservation orders, that there were other material considerations in terms of other planning policy considerations that outweighed that planning consideration. I don't know if Gary Collins, you'd like to add anything at this stage?
Yeah, just one point really, and that's about the TPOs. As you know, the TPOs were made in 2005, and quite often a reason for putting on a TPO is to provide some upfront protection and to try and ensure that if there's in this case, a green infrastructure asset, trees on the site, that they are fully taken into account in any future decisions. And so it's because otherwise, without it, outside of conservation areas, tree felling isn't controlled. So that's often a reason why a TPO goes on. And as Charlotte said, really, the protected trees would have been taken into account in 2007 when the former DC Central Committee considered the first permission that was granted for this site. But at least it did so with the trees there. If the trees hadn't have been TPO'd, then the trees could have gone without any restriction at all. And that committee may well have been considering a clear site. So TPOs are there to establish, trees as a value and something to be considered. But on some occasions, it's the case that they are either worked on or are removed. But in accordance with policy, replacement either by new planting or a financial contribution has to be made.
Do you want to come back on anything, Joe?
Yeah, just that comment about there being no time constraint, which sort of contradicts what was said before, because something has happened on that site. I mean, is that really the case, that any developer can basically knock a bit of a building down and then say, right, I can bugger off, sorry, pardon my French, I can leave the country and just leave this site and do nothing with it for, forever, and nobody can do anything about it? Is that actually a thing?
Chair, I can come in on that one. I mean, to implement a planning permission, it doesn't take much really, unfortunately, due to legislation. And that's by making a material start on site, which, as Charlotte has said, that could be interpreted as being the commencement of, it's a bit of a legal point, that one, but also discharge of, the main pre-commencement conditions as well. So I think, the date of May 2021 is a matter of fact, that permission requires implementation prior to that date. As to whether that has happened by virtue of the demolition that happened a few months ago, then I think, that'd be a legal point that we would have to look at. But I just think we just wanted to alert members to the fact that the original permission has that expiry date, but it's possible that they may have banked the permission by making that material start.
Thank you, Gary. Let's move on. So I've got Ollie, Fee, Clive, Leslie, Nicola and Harriet. Ollie first, please.
Hello, Chair. Sorry about that. It took me a minute to unmute myself. I'm sure that people will miss that mute option when we get back to meetings at City Hall. So I had a couple of quick questions. One was about the air quality. So would the impact on air quality of the current proposal that we're discussing today be significantly different than the impact of the existing planning permissions? And the second question was, the last use of that building, would it come under the permitted development, so it could therefore be transformed into flats without requiring planning permission if the developer decided it wished to under the current permitted development legislation?
Thank you. So in terms of the first question regarding air quality, I think to be completely sure on that point would require comparative air quality modelling to show the extant scheme and the proposed scheme to compare exactly. But the air quality team has advised us that the key issues around air quality relate to essentially the enclosure of Lower Ashley Road with built development. So based on the fact that the extant permission is for a 3-storey development with that 4th storey within the pitched roof, whereas the currently proposed scheme is for a 4-storey development, that would lead officers to suggest that there may not be a significant difference between those two schemes. However, the air quality team has been clear that even sort of small adjustments to a scheme can make a difference to the air quality modelling, and that therefore that would need, proper modelling in order to ascertain completely. I do have Steve Crawshaw here from the air quality team if he has anything else to add on that.
No, I think you've captured it there, Charlotte. It's in my opinion, it would be broadly the same, but there are likely to be some differences because the buildings aren't exactly the same mass and shape. But to be absolutely sure about it, you would need to model that again. I realise that's not a particularly satisfactory answer, but that's I think that's the position.
Thanks, Steve. And in terms of the second question, the permitted development rights apply from change of use from B1 office use to residential, and there are a number of criteria and conditions of that being a permitted development right. I think in this case, the existing building has undergone what I would term substantial demolition, and so I'm not sure that that would any longer benefit from that permitted development right because of that situation. But prior to the demolition works, potentially it would have done.
Thanks both. Do you have any follow-up, Ollie?
No, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Fee next then, please.
Afternoon all. Couple of points of clarification and then a few specific questions, if that's okay. First one's probably for Gary, I think. We know that Bristol as a city, we are somewhat awash with statements and declarations and all the rest of it with various green intentions. But can I just confirm that what we're looking at here is not whether or not we like this development or whether it complies with the declaration made by the council or whether it complies with our planning policy. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. We have a suite of local plan policies, as you know, in different documents, and we have commenced unfortunately long process of reviewing those documents, and what they'll have to take into account are various aspirations, different new situations as well, and also matters such as climate emergency and ecological emergency declarations. So I would expect the new suite of policies, which will be out for consultation in the coming months, really to kind of reflect those. But they would have to balance those declarations still with the need to deliver sustainable development for the city. And that's
but
where
we are perhaps alas stuck. We're using the policies that we have now, aren't we, rather than any development in the future?
That's correct. You know, the primary matter before you in terms of policy is the development plan, which are the local plan documents as they stand today.
Okay. Another very quick query, I think. with regard to the flood risk, am I correct in my assumption that if the FRA does throw up a problem subsequent to any decision we make, then that would halt the development if there's an insurmountable problem relating to flooding?
Yes, well, the recommendation is made subject to overcoming any objection from the Environment Agency.
Okay, just checking, thank you. Two more very specific questions. District heating. I read the bit about district heating being joined to the network, and I couldn't quite work out whether it's a yay or a nay on that one. Should it be joined to the district heat network or not? Because it seemed to be sort of, oh, we'll think about it and have a chat. So can you clarify that, please?
Sure. Essentially, there isn't a district heating connection ready and available for the site now, but it's in an area of high heat demand, and other parts of St. Paul's are coming forward with district heat networks. So it's anticipated that at some point in the future there will be a network available, and therefore the Section 106 would be looking at securing that connection in the future.
I think that's what I'm getting at, really. It's looking at would it or wouldn't it? What do you, I mean, can we condition that perhaps at some point, or as part?
Yeah, I think I'll check that. I think there's a condition requiring details of, essentially you would have to make the development ready and able to connect. So there are certain things you'd do at the development stage to make it ready, but then the Section 106 would be what would secure the connection.
Okay. And very finally, sorry about this, I was a bit concerned when I think it was Amira, said that she couldn't get hold of a contamination document. Can someone fill me in on that, please? Because I don't recall seeing that either. I might have missed it. There's a lot of papers. Thank you.
Yeah, I haven't heard from Amira to hear that she'd had trouble accessing this document. My understanding is that there are documents available on our website, but our contaminated land team have had a look at this application, and essentially in any case they fully acknowledge there is contamination on the site. It's a sensitive land use being residential proposal, and they have recommended conditions. I'm just trying to see if I can find the relevant one. There's condition 11 at page 8 of the amendment sheet, and essentially conditions that require further works around land contamination and remediation works to be carried out prior to commencement of the rest of the development.
My point was more about whether they're publicly available. You're satisfied they are publicly available, yeah?
I would have to double check because there have been a lot of updates on this scheme, but my understanding is that whatever was submitted in terms of contamination with the application was made publicly available. And I suppose the question would be, exactly what depth of detail was required to be made publicly available.
I think perhaps the distinction might be, or the inference that I got was that it's not in the committee report, but it will be on the website. And these things usually are not in the committee reports.
Okay, I was a bit
That was my interpretation, at least.
Right, that's all I had to ask. Thanks very much, Charlotte. Cheers. Very helpful.
The heat network condition is number 7, by the way, if anyone's interested, on the amendment sheet. Clive, next, please.
Thank you, Chair. 3 areas of clarification which might trigger questions. They are no parking, a bit on air quality, and then the climate emergency. So this is it's got advice 10, which means it'll be people moving in will be told when a residence parking zone is created, they won't be able to park their cars or get permits. Do we know when a residence parking zone will be implemented in this area?
Chair, I'll come in on that one if I may. It's hard for us to say, really. I know that residence parking areas have been a very contentious issue, but there is a commitment to review them and consider introducing them where there is overwhelming local support. So personally, I don't know where we are with that in terms of this particular area, but should that overwhelming support come forward, I'm sure that the council's administration will have due regard to that.
Okay, thank you. So the answer, the honest answer is no, you don't. It's just in my area, Clifton Down, when we had developments with no parking advice, until the residents' parking zone came in, it couldn't be enforced. And then highways, I don't know if you've got any from highways here, then said they couldn't enforce the old no advice because it was unfair. So what you had was people moving in, they could park their cars because there was no residents parking. Residents parking switched in and suddenly car parking was banned. So my question on this subject is how realistic is that no parking advice? Because it might be that we end up with 20 or 30 more cars in the area, which reduces amenity to the neighbours.
I think we've got Stephen from Highways. I don't know if you're able to come in on that, please, Stephen.
Sure. Basically, at the moment, it is obviously it's an advice that we apply, and it's something that I am going to be producing a paper to go to Transport Management Team in order to try and ensure that, as Councillor Stevens was asking, is it fully legal, and can we actually enforce it? I don't know if that really answers the question, but it is something that we are looking at the moment.
Okay, that's fine, Stephen. I mean, you can say what the information you have. So I draw from that there is a risk that this is built up. 28 flats, 20 cars, they park, and then residents' parking scheme might come in, and it's possible that they still have rights to park. So that's area one. Area two is air quality, and that's partially been studied. Dr. Talton, I think, in his representation said the figures were the micrograms per metre cubed. Is that right? Because what I read in the report was around about 40, which is not the air quality report, the office report. So I'm just trying to get, is it predicted to be 40 or is it predicted to be 53, please? Because they're quite substantially different.
Sorry, I did lose you a little bit there, but Steve Crawshaw, if you would be able to answer, was the question what the...
But the question is really what is the concentrations of NO2? Is it going to be around about 40 or is it going to be 53 like Dr. Talton said? And maybe presumably he got that figure from another report I haven't seen.
Yeah, the air quality assessment predicts concentrations at a range of locations, so it really depends about where you're talking. Some of the adversely affected properties are experiencing are predicted to experience concentrations that will be above 40. 40 is the legal limit.
Yeah.
So some of those properties where an adverse impact is predicted will be above 40, and then there'll be a range.
But where did he get the 53 from? Any idea?
Sorry, I need to look into that. But yes, I mean, the concentrations along Lower Ashley Road are certainly above 50. We have a diffusion tube on the facade of a building there, which is well above 50.
Yeah. So one of the representations, I think I noted it was Ornella, said that lots of people are suffering from asthma and breathing problems. Would air quality figures up at the 50 trigger that type of thing?
I mean, it really is difficult to predict that based on not an understanding of the person's pre-existing health, but certainly the link between poor respiratory health and poor air quality is well established.
Okay, so it's not impossible. So
it's not impossible.
It is possible that we can believe her and say there's quite a lot. Okay, and the last thing is on the climate emergency, please. So Steve, you're let off. This might be for Gary. I did a bit of checking. Climate emergency isn't in our local plan. It would have been, but it's been delayed. the government have declared a climate emergency. That was on the 1st of May 2019, so over a year ago. So it would be possible to incorporate that into our planning if either we've done an SPD, special supplementary planning document, but I know we haven't, or the government has introduced something, perhaps through the National Planning Framework or something like that, because that would then give us the material grounds to respond to the climate emergency. So Gary, has the government done anything that can help us actually sort this blooming problem out? I mean,
so I'm not aware of specific changes in either the National Planning Policy Framework or the National Guidance that gives us particular help here. I think the real focus is on local action, and as you correctly say, that would come through the local plan, which has experienced a delay. On SPD, supplementary planning documents, the key thing for SPDs is that they have to hang off existing policies. They can't go beyond what the kind of the higher level policy says. So, I mean, in the core strategy, back then when it was adopted, those were quite ambitious policies. We would probably be more ambitious as we refresh them in the next year or so. But the impact of that is that an SPD couldn't in itself introduce more onerous requirements than what our existing policies say at the moment.
Okay, Gary, that's fine, because that reminds me of how we are, and I can understand. So it's really difficult for us to have done something locally, and the only thing we could have relied on is action by government, and they haven't done anything.
Well, I'd hesitate to say they haven't done anything. I'm not aware of any significant changes that that make a difference to how we can practice in this particular area. What I'm sure they would say is that, well, it's a plan-led system. We want local authorities to refresh their local plans. So
I'm sure they'd say that, but the key thing is we have to base our plans off the National Planning Policy Framework, and they haven't updated that. That's fine. I'll go now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So let's move to Leslie next, please.
Right. My question is about the parking spaces, access from Gordon Road. When I was first looking at it, I was trying to find a way into the site and realised that these two are directly, or they appear to be directly onto Gordon Road, which I would have thought leaves them vulnerable to anyone that's cruising around looking for a parking space. Also, the way when you're exiting one of those parking spaces, you'd be either reversing or driving into the cycle lane unless it's separated by a high curb, which it doesn't appear to be. So that's a danger as well. Any comments on that, please?
So I'm not sure if I've got any plans that were shown in the presentation that would show that in more detail, but the Section 106 agreement would need to include consideration of that matter, including provision for double yellow lines, essentially around the turning head at the end of Gordon Road to allow access to the car parking spaces, and there are conditions that relate to the provision of access and securing that access. In terms of the actual number of car parking spaces that might be affected, I don't think it would be more than 1 to 2 spaces, but I would need to check that. And in terms of the visibility, in terms of the cycle footpath that you mentioned, that was something that was looked at the application stage, and sort of the edge of that building was given a sort of chamfered edge to allow partial visibility to that. I don't know if I'm able to still share my screen. I can see if there's a plan.
You should be able to, yeah.
I don't know, Claudette, if that was been disabled, that facility.
No, it's still on. You still have it. I'll just check. Yep, you can share your screen now.
Okay, thanks. Let's just see if we can find a plan that might assist. Bear with me a moment, please. Yeah, so that's not the right one. Bear with me a second. So this is the proposed landscape plan. So if you can see this area here, we did require them to pull the building line back slightly so that anybody moving in and out the car parking spaces, and equally pedestrians or cyclists would see a vehicle beginning to move in and out of the site. So that was something that the Highways Transport Development Manager team did look at and comment on at the application stage. I don't know if Stephen Rocky, who's here, if he has any comments on that he can comment on.
No, I think you covered it beautifully, Charlotte.
Does that answer the question?
Absolutely.
Do you have any follow-on, Leslie?
No, I don't. No,
okay.
I don't.
Thank you. Nicola, next, please.
Yeah, sorry, I might have missed this. So if someone could just clarify for me. I was wondering why the development plans haven't been reworked to allow the trees to stay. And my other question is about the nearest play area for the children. I don't think there's any mention of it. So, I mean, again, this is on the junction of a major road. There's not adequate parking facilities. That puts children at risk because we don't know where people are going to be putting their cars. And I'm also concerned about the contamination on the site. I've had stories in the past from parents who said they've sent their children out to play covered in antiseptic cream. And we don't want to see that sort of thing happening again. So yeah, those are my questions and I look forward to the answers. Thank you.
Chair, I can answer the first question, which is about why the scheme wasn't modified. Because of the contentious nature of the scheme, there were a couple of meetings with some of the campaigners, ward members, the developer, and also the registered provider who was on board. And there was reference to an amended plan that I think had been carried out on behalf of the campaigners. And I mean, whilst it was done by recognised architects, it was very much a block plan that kind of modified the footprint of the building slightly and just moved it all north, really. So what it did do, whilst it technically retained the trees and the development, albeit the branches would have been tapping on the windows of the front elevation, given the tight relationship. It removed the 2 parking spaces, I believe, and also all or almost all of the amenity space, because I think it was an attempt to, demonstrate that you could fit that number of units on the site still and retain the trees. So it was at a fairly, basic level, and what it showed really was that it wasn't really feasible to do that. Most importantly, however, because it had been sent to the applicants had a look at it, decided that it wasn't buildable, and therefore didn't modify their scheme in accordance with that. So, as we say on a regular basis, really, as a committee, you have to determine the scheme in front of you. But that's just a bit of commentary behind why we think that the scheme wasn't modified to retain the trees.
Okay, thanks. I'm turning to the comment about children's play space. I'll just direct you to the amendment sheet. So it's covered at, let's just have a look. Page, sorry, bear with me. If you refer to page 4 of the amendment sheet, there's a section that's titled Children's Play Space. That should have been forwarded round to you prior to the committee. I'll just run through what it says. Essentially, the urban living.
Sorry, can you just pause pause you there. It was sent by Claudette to everyone yesterday at 4 o'clock.
I haven't seen it, sorry.
You're definitely on the list. But go ahead, Charlotte.
So the recommendations regarding to play space come from the Urban Living Supplementary Planning document, which recommends that schemes likely to accommodate children and young people should facilitate opportunities for play and informal recreation. It recommends that under fives should be within 100 metres of a suitable play facility, and all other children should be within 400 metres, providing 10 square metres of play space for each child expected to live within a scheme. So there's then a calculator that calculates, as you're probably aware, the estimated number of children within any scheme based on the mix and tenure of units. In this particular case, that would equate to a total of 58 square metres, and the amenity space at the rear of the site measures 49 square metres in size, so slightly below that. However, the site is also within approximately 100 metres of the edge of the Ashley Street Park, which is quite a small park with some limited play equipment. But then beyond that, it's within 200 metres to the entrance of the Minor Road Park, which does include a formal playground. So we think that although the sort of general area provided to the rear of the site in terms of amenity space broadly meets the recommendations of that guidance, it's not specifically been designed really to integrate play space.
It's not child friendly either, is it? It's mostly paving stones on there as well, and trees.
Obviously it's quite limited in
very limited, yeah,
what we can do there, but we've had a look and we consider that because of these distances to these other areas of open space that are council parks essentially, that they would be within the guidance within that supplementary planning document.
Thank you.
And in terms of the contamination matters, I think this sort of came up before. The council's environmental health and contaminated land team have reviewed that in detail, and they would require the site, although it has been identified as having potential for contamination, and reports show that they would require extensive remediation in order to make the site safe for redevelopment, but also that does extend to things like any planting of any soil reintroduced onto the site for landscaping. So all of that would have to have certificates to demonstrate that it meets the relevant requirements. So it does extend to all of the landscaped areas on the site as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so finally I've got Harriet, please.
In fact, the other members have really covered most of the topics that I wanted to ask about, but I will just come back on the contamination. I saw somebody had posted up about the contamination report, which made some reference to a petrol station leak in the area, which may have affected the site. And although it just seemed to me that's quite a serious sort of contamination, and I can't quite understand why, if the document is available, it doesn't come to us in the pack of documentation, because it seems to me something we really ought to bear in mind, and it's certainly come up in other developments as an issue that we have had information about. So that's my first question. The second question is really sort of going, I don't know quite how to put this question, but the sort of main objection that Councillor Davis has made really seems to be, if we don't accept this, it's going to be a student accommodation. I actually find that quite a difficult proposition to take, because I'm going to say this in the discussion, so I won't go into detail, but it does seem to me that there are problems which have been highlighted by what Nicola has asked about, to accommodate families in this block. I don't think it's a very suitable place for families, I'll be blunt. Even if there's a playground round the corner, given the traffic and the road, which we've heard about, the lack of parking, all the rest of it, you know, how, and working families, how are the kids going to get to these places? And obviously there's not any suitable accommodation on site. So I'm just wondering, you know, who is this, who is it targeted at? Who is going to stay in these 28 flats? I think that's a kind of thing which maybe goes outside the planning consideration, but I think, you know, it's something that we really ought to think about. There's no point in just building houses for the sake of it unless we think about who is it for, is it fit for purpose for who's going to live in it? I think it probably would be fit for purpose for students. I'm not sure about families. So Gary probably will tell me this is not a question I can ask, but I'm sure you can answer the one about the contamination documents not being there, Charlotte. Thank you.
Chair, I'm happy to answer both. You know,
okay.
On contamination and lots of technical reports, because with planning applications we do get lots of supporting documents, plans, and reports. I mean, they're all there available on the public website. It's always a matter of judgment as to what we're upfront in providing members with, appended to reports, and we try to minimise the paperwork that we give you, because we know you get a lot with all your various roles. So we try to focus on the main plans and any sort of key summarised documents, really, just to minimise the kind of the mountain of paperwork you would otherwise get. All I would say is that, you know, if we've referred to something in the report and, you know, you can't find it on the website, we'll happily provide it to you direct. So it's about proportionality, really. It's certainly not to say that it isn't an issue and it isn't important in terms of providing it upfront to members as part of the reports pack. It's about trying to be proportionate as to what we're providing. In terms of suitability of the site for housing, especially family housing, I'll certainly take all the points there. A number of thoughts crossed my mind, really. I mean, Bristol as a city, I mean, there are lots of challenging sites, but there's obviously a very acute housing need, particularly for families. So, you know, sometimes we are looking at applications to develop difficult sites. Also, there's the issue of consistency. So on the neighbouring site, the former Yard Arts site, I don't know whether it was the B committee or the A committee, forgive me, but that site was considered for a very similar development that was led by a particular registered provider, and they will obviously rent those out to people on the housing waiting list, in partnership with us ourselves as a council. And I think there'll be the same situation on this site as well. And, you know, we have had meetings in the past with the registered provider who was on board at the time. I mean, that might be changing because obviously in the last 3 months, there's been lots of turbulence, but I understand that it's likely that a registered provider will take on the whole site. But at the very least, there'd be 30% affordable housing. And I think, you know, it's having some faith in those registered providers. They work closely with us as an authority to deliver much needed housing, and they will choose sites that are deliverable and they feel are suitable, and quite often they won't be perfect, and I think that applies here.
Thank you, that was very helpful.
Yes, thank you. So I think it's time to move on to the discussion. I just want to note that Councillor Eddy dropped out and hasn't returned for some time. So I think it's, if he does return, I don't think he can vote. He won't have been here for enough of the discussion and questions. I've also got an eye on the time, and I'm mindful we've got another application to discuss. So if you can keep your comments brief and pertinent, that would be appreciated. I see Joe, Harriet and Clive. Joe first.
Yeah, I think, Harriet, you nailed it just now when you talked about it, because I suppose we all think, oh God, we don't want any more student accommodation. But actually, if the housing, if that's the most suitable sort of tenant for accommodation like this, then maybe that's the best solution. I don't know. But what I'm concerned about is I don't think it is great family accommodation, having looked at it. And I will say, as a ward councillor, I never get anybody emailing me saying, I really need to move into a 2-bedroom flat. They always are telling me that it's not suitable and they need a house or they need more bedrooms. So in terms of it sort of meeting the needs of our tenants, city's tenants, I'm not convinced that it does, because you've got, we've got quite a lot of 2-bedroom, 1 and 2-bedroom flats around. If we had more 3-bedroom houses, we would have more vacant flats, which would mean we wouldn't need these 1 and 2-bedroom flats. So, it may not be particularly a material consideration, but if we're just saying that if we reject this, it's going to go to student accommodation, and we can't do anything about the trees anyway, I'm not totally. At the moment, I'm really not sure which way I'm going to go on this.
Thanks, Joe. Harriet?
Right, I want to start by saying something. I'll try and be brief. You may or may not know this is my last appearance on planning committee because I'm stepping down from the council. And I did just want to start by saying what a joy it has been to be on these planning committees. I would like to commend the officers for their very careful, thorough and meticulous presentation of the cases. I don't always agree with them, but I do appreciate their expertise. And I'd also like to thank the members of this committee, because I think we have really informed and intelligent and helpful discussions. Okay, so thank you all, and I shall miss this committee. It's about the only thing I will miss, and I'll tell you that. So thanks to everybody. I'm afraid I can't support this proposal. Somewhere in the documentation there was something, and I tried to find it again, but I missed it. But somebody said, I don't know if it was somebody in one of the reports or the statements, said this is not a suitable site for a residential premise, and I don't think it is. I think it should have stayed as a business premise, which would be quite acceptable. The things that make it unacceptable to me are above, and I'm not talking about the trees, by the way, because Gary has said we can't talk about the trees, but I do regret the trees. But the things that make it unacceptable to me are basically the air pollution issue and also the parking. I know this street intimately. It lies between my house and my ward of Brislington, and I go down it all the time. It's always chocker. It's chocker with cars, it's chocker with vans and huge great lorries. Even during lockdown, it was chocker. And it's particularly chocker at peak times, as I think one of the people said. So I just don't think that this is a good place for housing. I mean, I think that it would be all right for students because they're only there part of the time, so they won't be getting asthma and poisoned by taking in too much air pollution. But I don't think it's suitable for families. I know that we're always told, and sorry, I am going on a bit, but I will go on if you don't mind me doing so. The job of the planners is to tell us the legal situation, and they do it very ably. The job of us as members is to think about our constituents and the needs of the city. And we know the city needs housing, but I do think we have to think about the quality, not the quantity. And I don't think this is a quality scheme. I would hate to live in it. And nobody's mentioned the appearance of it, but I think it's rather ugly, and I preferred the little student houses before. I just don't think it's a nice place to live, and the air pollution and the traffic issues, because if these are young professionals or I don't know who they will be, some of them, the social housing will probably be our council tenants, and that's fine. But there's the non-affordable ones may go to young professionals, and they will have cars. So those are the reasons that I can't support. I'm sorry, Gary, but I can't support this proposal.
Thank you, Harriet. Thank you. Clive, next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sorry, but I also will not be supporting this proposal. We hear in the news all about poorer people, more deprived people having shorter lifespans. And this is what we would provide by giving approval to this. And I agree with Anita Bennett and Amira Cole, who both said it's discriminatory. It's published as if it's the public benefit of affordable housing versus a few things that can be sorted out. But you have really dangerous levels of air pollution. We heard evidence there. You're going to have a big parking mess and possibly more cars and more air pollution. You have, there's 5 aspects where it doesn't meet the urban SPD, our own urban SPD, which I can list later if it's necessary. And that's not really including the children's play area. And I had another thing, but that's probably enough for now. I think because of those problems, it's better for a temporary, if people are going to live there, it's better for temporary accommodation. People who are going to live there maybe 9 months a year, maybe 2 or 3 years of their life, healthier, with better lungs, and will be in lectures some of the time. So it's not, that's my conclusion really. And I think my own feeling is we really must learn from all the statistics that approving this type of thing will cause people who live in it to live shorter lives. So I cannot support it.
Thank you, Clive. Fee next, please.
God, this is a really tricky one. I mean, what we're looking at is essentially the developer is going to build on that piece of land and those trees are going to come down no matter what we say. So it's either going to be the student accommodation or the residential accommodation. And like, I think it was Harriet that said, I do think these flats are really ugly. God dear, they're terrible. In a sense, I prefer the look of the student ones. On the other hand, I'm acutely aware. I mean, I lived around the corner on Jubilee Road for years and years and years, and there's a lot of families around there. And there's a lot of, it's not a bad place to bring up a family in terms of facilities. You've got St Agnes Park, you've got St Paul's Adventure Playground just across the way from there's a zebra crossing there, and you have got the little Ashley Park. So and there's the legendary Parkway Methodist Nursery Group, as toddler group around the corner as well. So in terms of facilities, I think it's actually really, really good. I have got concerns about the air quality though. So I'm really torn. And do we really want students down in that area? The families living there's plenty of families living around there and accommodation similar. There's a big kind of red brick block just by the M32. There's the ex-pub just next door to it. And then there's a ex-yard arts site. So I'm really torn. It's going to get developed. Do we want families there or do we want students? I don't know. So somebody convince me, will you, one way or the other? Sorry. What about you, Tom? You try.
No, thanks. Ollie next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, Harriet, it's only because you got to speak first that you got to mention the beautiful appearance of the building. It looks so grim, and you kind of want new buildings in Bristol to at least have some kind of something about them that's pleasant to look at. It's almost as if it's a sort of this will do for a poor area and for people who are not that affluent to live in as well. Because I doubt that anything like that would be, although that said, I don't want to tempt fate by saying that something like that wouldn't be proposed for one of our conservation areas in the city, because I'm sure it would be actually. I have concerns about the air quality impact. Had I been assured by the officers that the air quality would be no different than if the student accommodation that was proposed before was to be built in, if it was basically the same impact, I think it's fair to say I would have been facing a straight choice between, do we want the site to be used for student accommodation or do we want it to be used for affordable and social housing? And in which case the social housing would trump it quite comfortably. But I also, I've known the area well for a lot longer than I look like I've been alive for. And it's always been a busy road. It's always been a smelly road in terms of traffic fumes. And whoever ends up living there, and I pity the people that live there at the moment, not because I'm sure the local community are wonderful people, but just in terms of the filthy air that they must have to breathe in every day. And it wouldn't matter whether it was students there for part of the year or people living there permanently. That the kind of air quality issues in those places on the busiest roads in Bristol is so awful that people get sick anyway. So it's not going to. I just don't. Oh, I want more social housing in Bristol, but I want it to be good quality, and I want people to be able to live well in the new places that get built. If it was, I can see it being good for being an office block or for being a place of work, because people might be there for a few hours a day and then they can go home afterwards. But I just can't see it as a residential place particularly. And much as I respect the fact that it looks like it's going to get developed either way, the first application that has been approved a couple of years ago, at least there's something about it that it actually looks nice and it looks welcoming, and it looks like something that if people live nearby and they walk past it, it won't. Whereas this thing that has that sort of Stalinist, oppressive kind of design, and it could add to a worsening of particularly air quality in a very, well, not very poor, but there's an area of Bristol where the rich people definitely don't live and don't have the choice of where they live so much. So I think building a load of rubbish there is well, I shouldn't call it a load of rubbish because it's not. I'm sure it's wonderfully designed in some sense, but it doesn't grab my heartstrings too well. I think at the minute I'm torn, and I could be convinced either way, but I'm veering towards possibly even being against.
Okay, thank you, Ollie. I don't see anyone else who wishes to speak. Therefore, I think I'll, as chair, test the water and propose that we do a motion to approve as per the report, so approval subject to removal of the objection from the Environment Agency and planning subject to planning agreement and conditions. Does anyone want to second that? No. Harriet, are you?
Yeah, I'm saying, can I move the rejection of this proposal?
Obviously the way that we've kind of slightly altered the process is, so we'll rather than rejecting it today, we'll have a discussion about what reasons we want to reject it for, then vote to defer it and bring it back to the next committee.
Okay. Right.
Chair, could I just ask a quick thing to be added into that if it is to come back to the next committee potentially?
I mean, I was just about to open it up to people who wanted to just kind of quickly, because we are running out of time, talk about, just kind of highlight at a high level what issues we want officers to go away and think about reasons for refusal on the basis of. So I think
air pollution.
Air pollution is, from the discussion, is definitely one.
And could it be air pollution? Oh,
sorry.
It's come up a few times as well.
Can we just let Ollie go first and then I'll.
Oh, sorry.
Come to the
Thank
other
you.
side.
Sorry, Fee. Could we make it air pollution, but just comparing the two schemes, so the existing permission and the proposed permission, because then if we know the difference, it doesn't have to be an exhaustive thing, but to give a ballpark, because I'm not a scientist, I won't understand a great thick report about it, but a ballpark idea of the difference it would make.
Yep. Okay. I think Fee was saying visual amenity. Was that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And something for the children as well. Let's have some, this is an opportunity to do something better. Let's put something in for the children as well.
So kind of on the basis of lack of play space for children, that would be.
Tom, it's that's a subset of our urban living SPD, which is, of course, is on material planning, and it misses 6 of the urban living It misses a vibrant and equitable neighbourhood. It creates its own microclimate. It's poor on car parking. It's poor on shared access internal. Probably just about makes it external. Others have talked about children's play area, and it misses on privacy, on noise. So that's 6 things it fails, and you see they weren't written in the officer's report, and I can understand why.
Thanks, Clive.
I think noise is very important. Thank you for mentioning that, Clive.
Okay, so what we've got therefore is air quality, particularly kind of a comparison of the 2 schemes, visual amenity, and the 6 aspects of the urban living SPD that Clive just outlined. Does anyone have any other aspects to add at this point? I assume those who've got their hands raised.
Just like to say, if it does end up as student accommodation, that will take a tiny bit of pressure off of housing conversion to HMOs, which of course HMOs are another form of affordable housing.
Okay, I'm not sure if there's anything we can add to on the basis of that though. Okay, so therefore, just to try and summarise where we're at. So I'll put forward a motion that the committee is minded to refuse the application and is going to defer it to the next meeting to allow officers to go away and have a think about reasons for refusal that would be defendable on the basis of air quality, visual amenity, and the urban living SPD. Can I have a seconder for that, please? I think I saw Harriet first. Go with Harriet first. Officers, are you clear on, before we vote, are you clear on what that, on everything?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to the vote on that, therefore. So if you're voting for, obviously it means you're voting for the deferral. Just to make sure we're on the same page. Okay, Fee first, please.
Took me by surprise there, sorry. 4.
Thank you. Clive?
4.
4, thank you. Leslie?
4.
4, thank you. Ollie?
4.
Thank you, Ollie. 4. Harriet?
4.
4, thank you. Joe?
4.
4, thank you. Nicola?
4.
4, thank you. And I will vote 4 as well, so that's unanimous. So we'll defer it and come back next time. Therefore, we can move on to the next item. I'd like to suggest a comfort break. Just 5 minutes. Well, it's 7 minutes just, so let's round it up and say come back at 8 p.m. Please be back at your computer with your video on for us to start at 8. Thank you.
If everyone could turn their stop the video, please, but don't leave. Thank you.
Tom, has it started again yet?
No, 2 minutes.
All right, sorry. I shall mute myself.
We're still recording.
Sorry, is that an issue, Claudette?
Okay, Ollie and Mike, are you with us? Hi, Ollie.
Hello, sorry.
No worries. Fee was there, she's disappeared. There we go. And Mike, are you present?
Hopefully.
Hiya. Okay, that's everyone, isn't it? Just need to get the public forum up. Okay. So let's get started on the next item, which is land north of Airport Road. The public forum first and foremost. So first we've got Amy Hickson.
She's just joining now.
Hi Amy, can you just say your names for the record, please?
Hi, good evening. My name's Amy Hickson. I'm from Turley and I'm the planning consultant on behalf of the applicant Booklook.
Hiya. Please go ahead. You've got a minute for your statement.
Thanks. I hope you have received and read my written statement. This evening, I just wanted to highlight 3 key points for members' consideration. Firstly, this is a policy compliance scheme. Indeed, there are areas where it exceeds policy. For example, reduction in CO2 emissions, and that's a key and poignant point in light of the Council's declaration of a climate emergency. As we all know, Bristol is also in a housing crisis, and to accelerate the delivery of homes, this proposal has been brought forward and progressed in partnership with the Council's housing delivery team and indeed Homes England. Through the use of modern methods of construction, this development will promptly deliver much needed affordable housing and open market housing, which people on average key worker salaries will be able to buy. So overall, the proposals represent an innovative and sustainable solution towards the prompt delivery of homes, all for a good social purpose. With this in mind, and in line with your officer's recommendation this evening, I hope that members will be able to approve the proposals.
Thank you. Next we have Councillor Paul Smith with a very interesting profile picture. Hi Paul.
Hiya.
Go ahead, you've got a minute.
Yeah, I'm Paul Smith, Cabinet Member for Housing. I know this site very well. It's my grandmother's house, council house, backed onto it and used to play in the ruins of the post-war prefabs and the stream there. One of the things that's not in the report that I wanted to highlight is that this is being developed for council housing. It says affordable housing in the document. We've actually got a deal with Booklook that means at least 30% of these homes will be council housing owned by the council housing department. And therefore, I think that goes well beyond what we normally get in terms of affordable housing requirement. And also, I would like to say that it will be a much better place to play than it was when I was a kid. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So we did have another person, Roger Jimson, for the Bristol Walking Alliance and Cycling campaign, but he's not.
Talking about no.
Not
not there.
No, not there. So we'll have to skip over his slot and move on to the officer report, please.
Hello, everyone. I'll try and be as quickly as possible. I know you've been here a long time, but there's a few key issues that I need to go through. I'll just show my screen now. Okay, the application site is north side of Airport Road. The land within the red line area is currently 2 allocated sites in the Bristol local plan. Currently just an open space, grass, trees and other vegetation on the site. In the middle of the site, we have Brislington Brook, which is a designated flood zone 2 and 3. The local plan allocation identifies key considerations such as a site-specific flood risk. The development should be informed by ecology surveys, maintaining the wildlife network, addressing noise issues from Airport Road, and safeguarding and neighbouring properties. Moving on to the proposal itself. The proposal is for 173 dwellings. This will be in the form of 77 two-storey houses to the rear of neighbouring properties, and then four blocks of 4 stories with a total of 96 flats here adjacent to Airport Road. The applicant specialises in homes using modern methods of construction. The homes are built in factory conditions and constructed off-site for a fast build programme. The development includes, sorry. Okay, sorry. The development includes 2.2 acres of open space, which includes children's play space in line with the guidance set out in the Urban Living SPD, a total of 800 square metres. More detail of the actual specifics of that is provided on page 83 of the officer reports. Over 200 parking spaces are provided. Predominantly all of that will be allocated to the houses with drives and courtyard areas for the flats. There are some spaces along the internal roads which could be used by anyone. The scheme includes new tree planting in excess of the Bristol tree replacement standard. And as previously mentioned, 30% of the housing will be secured via the planning obligations as affordable. 77% will be social rents and 23% will be intermediate rents. In terms of the mix of units, it's predominantly 2 beds and 3 bed units. 1 bed and 2 bed units that predominate, which is deemed acceptable, an appropriate mix for the area, which is currently dominated by family housing based on the latest census statistics. In terms of public consultation, we've only received a total of 8 objections, which are focused on amenity impacts, design and traffic issues. Moving on to key issues. With regard to the impact on existing properties, the proposal will clearly change the outlook from the rear of the existing dwellings to the north of the site. But this is an allocated site, so any development will clearly change this outlook, but we've obviously reviewed the impact of development and considered it to be acceptable. Due to the change in levels, the majority of new dwellings will be at a lower level than the existing houses to the north. New dwellings will be beyond the recommended window-to-window distance of 21 metres. There will be overlooking of rear gardens from first floor windows, but this is considered acceptable and typical for a suburban context such as this. The application includes a BRE daylight and sunlight assessment, which concludes that the level of overshadowing to the rear gardens would be acceptable, and each garden will continue to receive adequate sunlight throughout the year. The most significant overshadowing to the gardens to the north will be during the equinox at early morning because of the orientation of the sun. A number of objectors have pointed out the scale and size of the 4-storey blocks of flats. As these are over 40 to 60 metres from the neighbouring gardens, we consider the overlooking to be acceptable, and also that would be no overbearing impact. These flats will create some overshadowing to the flats the other side of Airport Road. That will be mainly focused in late evening hours, so it wouldn't be significant to warrant a refusal. Moving on to design, while the 2-storey dwellings at the back of the site nearest neighbouring houses are deemed to have minimal visual impact, probably standard for the area, there's clearly going to be a bigger visual impact from the large blocks of flats, which are slightly unusual and not typical of the area. City design team have concerns with the massing of the blocks being too large and have suggested breaking up the blocky appearance. It is considered, though, that the overall form is acceptable due to the similarities to the new buildings further along to the west, southwest, which are also flat roof and 4 stories, which you can see on this slide here, which have just finished construction. It's called, I think it's called Field Park, that scheme. In terms of improvements to the scheme, we've received revised plans at the end of May, which have provided additional planting to the front of the Airport Road flats. It's acknowledged, though, that the trees will take some time to become established to have some visual impact. Staying with the apartment blocks, and in particular, single aspect units, this is a key issue for the officers, as we have concerns with the living environment for future occupiers. The Urban Living SPD seeks to maximise opportunities for dual aspect units, and officers have particular concerns with the livability of north-facing units and south-facing units in the blocks of flats. In each block, there are 2 one-bed units on each floor. You see this is a floor plan showing all the flats in the block on each level, so the floor levels, 2 units on each floor. The one-bed units facing north and south with only single aspects. In terms of the north-facing units, the BRE daylight assessment highlights that those units will fail to meet the recommended average daylight factor, is essentially the level of daylight that room receives. The levels will only be 1.4%, this is slightly technical, where the recommended level is 1.5% for the kitchen and living rooms. But as this is only 0.1% below the recommended level, we're not going to raise any significant objections to that. We're more concerned with the south-facing units because of the proximity to Airport Road, which is a busy route within the city. Again, we're concerned about noise impacts from the road and the added potential problem of overheating from the south-facing windows. Regarding noise, the application includes a noise assessment which has been reviewed by the Environmental Health Officer. They have advised us that the scheme would create a satisfactory environment due to the inclusion of mechanical trickle vents. Residents would have to keep windows closed in order to achieve the recommended internal noise levels. If they choose to do so, background ventilation is provided with the trickle vents. The Environmental Health Officers have also advised that residents still will obviously have the choice of opening windows to let ventilation in. This would result in noise levels which would be above the recommended internal levels within each flat. But it's dependent on how wide open the windows open and how much noise there is obviously outside. Again, it will be a personal choice of future occupiers. Some residents may prefer to have windows open and experience a higher level of noise, and the Environmental Health Officers have advised us that there tends to be less of an issue with traffic noise than other noise you get from ventilation plants or refrigeration units or even music. While officers are disappointed that no further variations have been made, we consider the evidence presented is sufficient to us to be satisfied with the living environment that we created. I'd also just like to point out that the scheme has changed, with the units now being further back from Airport Road. The cycle path, shared cycle path, footpath has been reduced from the original 5 metres to 3.5 metres, which gives the ground floor units more defensible space. There's additional landscaping, and the units have been moved approximately 0.5 metre further back into the site. Problem being that they're constrained because of the brook behind, so there's not much space for a manoeuvre. And just to point out, in total, in terms of the total number of units on the site, only 18% will be single aspect. Moving on to an objection we have from the highways team. While the scheme is considered acceptable on traffic grounds and parking, the highways team are objecting to the revisions made to the pavement along Airport Road. As initially submitted, the proposals included provision of a 5 metre wide shared footpath and cycleway. But as I've explained, to address the issues officers had with the future living environments, that's been reverted back to as it is existing. As you can see on the bottom photo there on the slide. So at the moment, there's a 3.5 metre footpath. So the highway officers have objected to this and consider that it's a failure, that the failure to provide the additional land has resulted in a substandard route, which does not comply with the council's current standards or the plans within the local cycling walking infrastructure plan. In particular, will not cater for the increased number of users that will be generated as a result of this development or additional development in the area such as Philwood Park and Hengrove Park. Officers have balanced this issue alongside the issue about the livability of the single aspect units, and on the fact that the existing cycle path has just been constructed to 3.5 metres width. You can see the difference. So back in 2017, we've had significant improvements along Airport Road, which were funded by the West of England Local Partnership through a local growth fund. And works have just recently been completed. So I think it's difficult for us to present to you that the existing highway network is unacceptable and not safe. But if members do have any questions regarding the highway objection, we do have a member of the team here to answer those questions. Just moving on, as I've concluded in my report, we still have an objection, unfortunately, from the Environment Agency, and this will need to be resolved before we can support the application and put this forward for an approval. So we are requesting delegated power to resolve this issue alongside the completion of the legal agreement and the conditions. These images, this is the brook, which, well, there's hardly no water flowing through the brook at the moment on the right there, and the plan on the left shows you where the extent of the flood zone, which is tight on the brook. The EA are still concerned about the flood risk and the impact on ecological interests. They require a copy of modelling work that's been undertaken by the applicant and further details of the bridge that's proposed, and potentially a water framework directive assessment has to be completed before the Environment Agency can withdraw their objection. So if those flood risk issues are addressed, officers are on balance able to support the application subject to the completion of a necessary legal agreement, saw the obligations listed on that slide, and also finalise planning conditions, weighing up the negative and positive aspects of the scheme. You know, this is providing affordable units, additional play space and open space, there's ecological mitigation, and also tree planting. On balance, we can recommend approval following once the flood risk issue is resolved. Thanks very much.
Thank you. So let's go to questions. Does anyone have any questions, please? Doesn't look like it. Clive, go on.
Thank you, Chair. It's on the cycle path. So I took a screen print of that. Is that it's quite narrow, but is that cycle path two-way in that, where it's going to be less than 2 meters, isn't it?
I would assume so. It's both ways. I think unless if Stephen's there, you can advise differently.
It looks, it looks very narrow for cycles to pass, and then you've got the cars and buses just a few inches away.
Yeah, absolutely. What you've got there is basically 1.5 meters, I think. So it's 2 meters for pedestrians and 1.5 for the cyclists, giving 3.5 in total. So it doesn't really give very much room for 2 cyclists to be able to pass in at the same time. So so that was the reason for our request for the additional amount of land in order to be able to provide a fully segregated route, and this would be in line with the LC width that Angelo referred to previously, and the fact that this is actually part of the South Bristol orbital route, for a key cycle route for the area.
Yeah. So the road is quite wide itself. It looks like you might be able to nick a metre from that, but that's not. No?
No, unfortunately not, due to the amount of traffic that uses the route. It's a busy route for HGVs.
Yeah.
That I'm assured by the project manager for Airport Road that is not a feasible option, unfortunately.
Okay, so it definitely, I mean, that just makes it seem to me, I'm not a frequent cycler, but I can't cycle in a dead straight line to avoid someone by about 5 centimetres, where you've got a very busy road 5 centimetres the other side. It's quite important, but presumably we could ask you guys to go away and work on it as a condition, or something like that, or we defer it until it's solved. What are our options?
Sorry, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think Gary needs to answer that one.
I'm poised. So again, without being too boring, obviously you should be determining the scheme before you. It has been subject of discussion, and I think whilst our colleagues in Transport DM have made their views very clear and justified it, as a development management service, we had to take the overview, and so we've asked questions of our own colleagues who have been looking at the viability of the site, and also had discussions with the applicants as well about, how movable are the buildings, so we've looked at those options. The site, as you can see from the aerial photographs and the layout, it's a fair, relatively thin, linear site. It's very difficult to develop in a viable way, and also you've got a brook in the middle of it as well. But then, as you've pointed out, you've got the busy airport road at the one sort of boundary as well. So you are left with, to deliver that number of units, which we are informed by our internal colleagues in the housing delivery team is necessary. To make it deliverable, you are down to what you use that extra 1.5 metres for. So as planning officers, we feel that we would like to deliver everything, but coming down to a choice, we've sided on the additional 1.5 metre as defensible space, for residents to have as a front garden, or certainly an area of amenity to kind of try and minimise the impacts of the road on them, rather than having a widened cycleway, footway right in front of their front gates, so to speak. So it's one of those difficult choices. The applicants have in the past said that they could look at it, but it's not part of their proposal, but that follows a discussion that we've had with them. We just think on balance that whilst we would like to deliver a 5 metre wide route, that the 1.5 metres space that is available is probably best as a frontage to the actual residential properties.
Okay, I'm going to defer to other cyclists, but I can imagine somebody pushing a pushchair down there, a couple of cyclists coming to. It scares me, but I'll leave it to the experts.
Okay, thanks, Clive. Harriet, please. You're still on mute. Oh, there we go.
Right. Well, the other sort of problem, obviously, in the site, which otherwise I think is really great, is the brook. And I know that Brislington Brook does flood in Brislington, but it's rather bigger there. Could you just give us a bit more detail about how severe this flood risk actually is? Because it looks like a very tiny stream in the pictures, and I can't really imagine it flooding very dramatically, but perhaps you could give some detail.
I wouldn't be able to go into full detail about the levels of flood, but essentially the flood risk assessment should look at the potential for a 1 in 100 year event, which is pretty extreme. So floor levels have to be set at certain levels, which they've done. Is unfortunately on this scheme, the modelling that they've created, the applicant's created modelling himself to look at the potential flood levels, which the Environment Agency, they need to see the workings out essentially to the levels that have been produced by the applicant. So they need to see how they've come to those conclusions. So essentially, it will all be looked at within the flood risk assessment. Floor levels will be at specific heights. The bridge will have to be at a certain position, so there's no impact in terms of flows, and also the ecological impacts I mentioned. But in terms of actual detailed levels, I can't give you that right now.
To follow up, Chair, I think from having met the Environment Agency, I think it was last week, about this, I think we're at a level of trying to just resolve technical details rather than matters of principle. So I think it is, as Angelo has said, that it's about validating the model that the applicants have chosen to use. I think the EA are okay with the conclusions of that modelling, but of course, like any technical body and a statutory consultancy, they want to see all the workings out. So that needs to happen. And I think there are particular fine details about the ecological enhancements and also the precise design of the new bridge over the brook. But it all sounded, I might be naive, but it all sounded resolvable to my ears anyway when we met them.
Thanks both. Does anyone have any other questions? Joe?
With regard to the issues of flooding, it has to be resolved. They have to be satisfied in order for this development to go ahead, right? So, you know, we're not. There's no point in us saying we reject this application because of the flood risk, because that's got to be resolved anyway. Is that correct? Am I correct on that?
That's correct, yes. Yeah, as an authority, if the Environment Agency are maintaining an objection on flood risk, if we wanted to grant permission, we would have to refer it to the Secretary of State. But I'm fairly confident that we can resolve it with the Environment Agency without resorting to that.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, one of the kind of parts of the recommendation is delegated approval to resolve the Environment Agency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But carry on, Joe, sorry.
Sorry, well, it's just the thing with cycling. I mean, I didn't used to be, I do ride a bike, and I'm a bit like Clive, though. I wobble and I wouldn't feel very comfortable on that route. But, you know, with the COVID situation, we are seeing more and more people on bikes, and in my ward, which is also in a particular part of my ward by the Portway, which is another really busy road, there's a lot more cycling, and it goes on the pavement because the road's so dangerous, and people have been hurt by cyclists. So I really am concerned that this has to be sorted out. So I don't know I'm still a bit confused about what's being proposed. So I know we've already talked about it, but to me, this is the only thing, apart from the flooding, obviously, that could be a deal breaker for me. So I just like a bit more of an understanding about what's going to be done.
Well, if members have issues with the cycle path, the shared path, we probably have to work on this with the applicant. So essentially, if we are going to go back to a 5-metre shared cycleway and pedestrian path, that's going to have implications for the landscaping. So there's going to potentially be less trees, which sort of help with the overheating. In other words, this is going to be way on in the future, you know, to screen the windows in a way, and also to improve the visual impact. So it's essentially, I think it's up to members to sort of weigh up those issues. What's ultimately more important, you know, improving that pedestrian cycle environment, or changing the visual appearance of the scheme and the defensible space that those, in particular, ground floor units have. So ultimately, yeah, we could lose landscaping. Yeah, people will be, you know, it's quite close to the road already, but yeah, that's something that you'd have to bear in mind.
Okay, Nicola has her hand up. Go on, Nicola.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I was really pleased with the thoughtful design in terms of children, and it's really nice to see a development that takes into account existing developments, because I get a real sense that this is about building a balanced community. And, you know, we've got lots of 3-bedroom council properties in the area, and we know that there are people who want to downsize into 2-bedroom properties, and we also know that there are parents with young children possibly don't want to use cycle tracks but are desperate for those types of accommodation, and there's a real opportunity to build new communities with children and places for them to play. So I think it's amazing, and I just want to say, because we don't get many planning applications where I feel that children's needs are really...
Sorry, is there a question? I'm
there is a
mindful
question.
that we need to have yeah.
No, it's not really. It's just a bit of a waffle, really. Just to say thanks. I think it's really nice. There's no information really about how local housing tenure is taken into account in terms of numbers of people that will benefit from downsizing, which is something that we've looked at in the past. So that's my only question, really. Yeah, I'll shut up now.
Is that something you have the information to hand on?
Sorry, Chair. It was about tenure, specific tenure in the area. We don't have that level of information, I'm afraid, because, and having regard to what the cabinet member said about the this being council housing, which I understand is part of those kind of discussions that are happening in the background. Obviously, planning sits kind of alongside that, and so we have to view it, as we advise you on a regular basis, as a housing development with, and what we would do in terms of the 106 agreement is secure at least a fallback position of 30% affordable housing. And in all reality, it probably will be a lot more, but in terms of the planning system, we can only require 30 through the planning system. So for that reason, we don't go into the level of detail of types of tenure in a specific area. In terms of mixed and balanced communities, in accordance with the core strategy policy, we may look at really kind of house types in terms of 1 bed, 2 bed, 3 bed, whether they're houses and flats. And I think as set out in the report, I think this benefits the area in terms of introducing that mix, really. So unfortunately, I don't have a specific answer to the question that was asked, because it's not necessarily something that we look at as a planning authority.
But it is the first proposal for council housing in the city, isn't it? Am I right?
I think I forgot what they call it now, but the allotment site in Ashton Vale might have been
Alderman Moors.
Alderman Moors, yeah, I think that was the first one I know, because we work with that closely with our HRA colleagues on that one, and I know they are involved in this one as well. So it may not be the first, but it's probably the second and the first that's come through the planning system in the last couple of years.
Thanks.
Thanks. Fee had her hand up and it's gone down again. I just want to check you don't want to say anything. Okay, thank you. Clive, do you have another question?
Yeah, it's coming back to the cycling. I mean, it looks a great layout. I really love it, but I'm really worried about the cycling. If I voted for this, I would be scared, but I'd be killing someone. And I'm looking now at the helicopter view, and I sort of think, well, maybe with 6 weeks, they could divert the cycle path. Presumably the big issue is where you've got the big buildings, which are right by Airport Road, and then the rest of the cycle path can widen. So my question to Gary is whether you think, Gary, that a deferral for 6 weeks just to work on that would actually come out with a better outcome.
So I think my response to that would be, you could probably predict the first thing I'm going to say, you should determine the scheme in front of you, but obviously you get an opportunity to do that when and as and when the officer recommendation is moved, if it's seconded and if it goes to the vote, and see what happens there. If, for example, that motion failed, then I think what would be practical is that we could be given delegated powers to explore the widening of the cycleway, and on the basis that that was achievable, then have delegated powers to issue the planning permission.
I think you could reroute it as well, possibly for part of it. Just be a bit more creative instead of just widening.
I think rerouting would be a redesign of the scheme.
Yeah, it might be.
Expanding the existing cycleway by 1.5 metres, whilst it's a change to the scheme, is something that I know the applicants were considering. Obviously, it's not something that they've submitted, but it's what they were, considering. So that might be resolvable, in accordance with a resolution that you gave. But I mean, normally we say don't redesign the scheme. I think rerouting definitely would be, because it'd have lots of knock-on consequences, because the site is so tight for the reasons given before. However, a widening of the cycleway might be achievable without significant redesign, apart from the expense of, front gardens and some of the landscaping that Angelo's referred to.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sophie's hand is back up. Is it a quick? Yes, you actually want to speak this time. Go ahead.
I mean, the cycle path is probably a bit on the narrow side, but speaking as a cyclist, you did ask for my massive expertise there, Clive. I'm not overly worried about it, but if we could do something just to sort of say, can you go back and ask them, rather than reject the whole thing on that basis, is that possible? Because if they can make it a bit wider, that'd be a good thing, but I certainly wouldn't turn the whole thing down on that basis.
I think what I would recommend, and what Gary was just saying, is that we could add an extra kind of condition to the existing recommendation to achieve that. Nicola, you've got.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's any way the cycling path can be deferred until the residents get in, because we're making decisions about the lives of people who don't live there yet, and it would be good that there could be some community development work with the residents to determine what they really need. Is that possible?
I think the applicants will want to proceed with certainty one way or the other, really. I think as clearly as they've made the application, they would happily develop the scheme as we've shown you. They may also be okay with widening the cycleway, but I think they would need that steer now, really. Otherwise, they are either providing gardens for the units or they're not. So I think developers always like certainty. The planning system's always, to a degree, uncertain. But I think certainly at the point of decision and issuing a planning permission, the applicants will want to know one way or the other. But I'm sure they'll be open to, discussions on that. But I think they want to know now, really.
Okay, I'm just keen to support this because I think it's such a good scheme.
Shall we move on to the discussion and have a bit of a fuller discussion on this topic and everything else? Does anyone want to? Harriet, you've got there first. Go on, Harriet.
Yes, I'm very much in favour of this scheme. The only problem with it, obviously, is the cycle path, and that does concern me. But as Fia said, I don't think it can be a reason for refusing what I think is a really good scheme. I mean, first of all, it's council housing, and that is so crucial. We're so in need of it. Secondly, I think the housing is quite good. I mean, I'm never very keen on flat blocks, but they're not too bad, these ones. And the brilliant thing about it, which Nicola has mentioned, is the child-friendly nature of it. Not only are there the playgrounds, but there's a brook and trees. This is what our kids need. I think this is so important. It matters so much to me. We've seen during lockdown how appalling it is for kids who are cooped up in horrible tower blocks with nowhere to play. And this is the kind of scheme we need. So I hope that maybe some solution can be found to the cycle path thing. But I think this is a really good scheme, and I'm totally in favour of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Fee next.
Support this as well. And I know we're a bit worried about the cycle path, but at least it's got one. There's an awful lot of roads in Bristol that have no cycle provision whatsoever. So, I'd be jumping came across that. So I'm happy to support it. I suggest we move to the vote reasonably quickly. I don't think anyone's going to vote against this one. Could be wrong.
Yeah, I think we'll probably move shortly, but there were a couple of other people that indicated. Mike, you were next.
Let Ollie go first.
Sorry?
I was going to make a proposal.
Oh, right, okay. All right, so I've got Ollie and Joe, and then I'll come back to you then, Mike.
Well, thank you, Chair. I share the kind of concern about the cycle path, and I wondered if we could just encourage officers to continue to see if there's a way of us being able to ensure that the upgrade of the key walking and cycling route does happen. It might not be able to happen immediately or as part of this development, but to sort of keep it on the table for the future, because it would certainly, any development would benefit from it. Otherwise, it's an excellent development. And actually, the question I had was answered in the presentation. So kudos to the officer for the presentation as well.
Chair, can I advise on that? I think
yeah, go on.
If members want a widened cycleway, I think that has to be specified now, really. Developers, once they get planning permission, they will build that out generally. They won't be donating land for a widened cycleway, just to be perfectly honest.
Okay, thank you. Joe?
Okay, so Gary sort of answered that question, but I actually do think, I mean, it's not, okay, I'm going to recognise it's not a deal breaker, but it makes me nervous because otherwise it is a good scheme and it is a family friendly scheme. So it's great because you'd have this lovely place with green space and nice place to live, and you bring in all these families, and then, you know, they're walking along the side of the road for, to go to school or whatever, and somebody gets hit by a cyclist, and that does worry me. I'm not saying that I won't support it. I will support it, and if it can't be done through that sort of development management or development control process, it's something that councillors, responsible councillors who are involved in developing local plans need to take into account in the future, so that there is the scope and the opportunity to look at this again, because although Gary has said the developer isn't going to just give over more land, it may turn out that there would be an opportunity in the future. And as people's cycling and driving and walking habits change, we may need to change priorities along that road. So I just think it is something that almost we need to put a marker down just to say that this is something that needs to be considered. I mean, it may well be considered, but then it might not. You could go for years before they do anything. So that's just what I'm concerned about.
Okay, I'll go back to Mike then to move us forward. Go ahead, Mike.
I propose that we accept the officer's recommendation, but with a condition that officers will work with the developer on a proposal to widen the cycle path.
And I assume that means widen it to 5 meters, just to be specific there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have I think Ollie's peace sign, I assume that he's putting it means a seconding.
It's a polite way of seconding, Chair, yep.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Let's move to the vote on that then. So we're voting on the officer recommendation to grant, subject to conditions that give delegated authority to resolve the EA objection, expand the size of the cycle path to 5 meters, and deal with the other usual conditions. Okay, so Fee first, please.
That, thank you. 4.
4, thank you. Clive?
4.
4, thank you. Leslie?
4.
4, thank you. Ollie?
4.
4, thank you. Mike? 4, thank you. Harriet?
4.
4, thank you. Joe?
4.
4, thank you. Nicola?
4.
4, thank you. And I'll vote 4 as well, so that is unanimous. Thank you very much, everyone. That concludes the meeting. Thanks for your time.
Well done, Tom. Thanks.
Bye-bye, Harriet. Good luck.